Mm-hmm.
How you doing there, folks? My name is David McCracken and welcome to Trasnatira, and today we are coming to you from Limavady Area Ancestry. Today we're going to do a talk on the Reverend John Graham of Maghera and then Tamlaghtard and McGalligan. So I'm just going to hand you over now to the Reverend Rhys Jones of Tamlaghtard.
Thank you, Stephen. Good evening, everyone. I want to begin just by offering a word of thanks for Stephen for his kind invite, his invitation to join with yourselves tonight. I got to know Stephen just via text, really, through I think Brian Robinson gave me his number, just in terms that we are both, it appears quite clearly, history enthusiasts. I've spoken to I think I've spoken to Fiona once before, and she was guiding me in some World War II history in the Limavady McGilligan area, which I intend to explore once the weather changes. But my name is the Reverend Rhys Jones, as Stephen says, and I'm the newly appointed incumbent of Tamlaghtard and its sister parishes up in your beautiful part of the world. I'm only in post really about a month, instituted on the 18th of November, but just moved into the rectory on Christmas week. So I'm still settling in and still very new to the whole area. Now, I share two similarities in common with the good Reverend Graham. I am speaking to you from my home. I'm off today in Maghera. I'm from Maghera. I am a member of St. Luric's Parish in Maghera, where Reverend Graham served. I think it was his curacy. I'm not sure if he was ever incumbent, but he was certainly a clergyman who spent time and served here in my home parish. And obviously, as Stephen has just said, he went on to be incumbent up in the beautiful parish of Tamlaghtard. I think he's laid to rest there now. I'm not entirely sure if I'm right in that, but I think he is at rest in the graveyard at Tamlaghtard. And clearly, as I said, I'm the new incumbent there. That's what I share in common with the Reverend Graham. And of course, we are both members of the Church of Ireland. Other than that, I know he wrote a book on the Siege of Derry, that he was a writer of prose of some renown, and quite an interesting figure, shall we say, historically, in and around that time period. But I'm as eager to learn and as ignorant of his life as perhaps some of you are, and I'm looking forward to learn a little more. I know Fiona is very knowledgeable, very competent, and I'm looking forward to hearing what she has to share with us tonight. Fiona, I'm going to hand over to you. Every blessing.
Thank you very much, Reverend Jones. It's actually going to be myself and a number of people who are going to be speaking tonight. We have a lot of slides and video and audio for you to watch and listen. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to stop my video to help technology, and hopefully everything will go smoothly. But I hope you'll enjoy this. Thank you. So Reverend John Graham was a Church of Ireland minister, a historian, a writer, a poet, and an Orangeman. He was also a husband and father and a very charitable man despite his poor financial situation. He was accepting and supportive of all denominations, but he was also outspoken and stood by his Protestant values. He lived during some incredible periods of Irish history, and without his documenting of these events in his diaries, books, newspapers, and magazines, we would know even less about our past. Ironically, despite the huge volume of writings of Reverend Graham, we know very little about the man himself. The diaries that he kept for recording his daily life and the history of the Church of Ireland, and which were used for referencing surveys, have gone. The search still continues for a picture of him. We know he suffered from asthma and that his sons were over 6 feet tall, that he spoke quickly, that he was witty, that he was at times very eccentric, that he doted on his wife and family, but that he also had many sufferings in his life. Reverend John Graham is a somewhat forgotten character of our history, but by providing an overview of his life in the next hour, we hope that the importance of this man is recalled.
My name is Hugh Farrell. I'm a retired soldier and I live in Longford. And it was in Longford that the Reverend John Graham was born. If you look at the map on the left-hand side of your screen, map of Longford, you see Ballymahon is down in the very south of Longford, next to the Westmeath border. Ballymahon is situated about 10 miles from three major urban populations, namely Mullingar, Athlone, and Longford Town. So this was the area he was born in. He was born in the parish of Stroud, and it's very close to the town of Ballymahon. And his early education, if you look at the second map there, was in Ballymulvey. It's a more modern map, and he was taught in a school there by Christopher Robinson, the Reverend Christopher Robinson, who taught Greek and Latin, among other subjects. His parents were Anne Hart, who I believe was from Newton Castle, which is a neighbouring parish of Shrewd. Most of the ancestry gave her birth as Newtown Callas. Now, whether it was Newtown Castle, and there's a place along the Shannon called the Callows in Newtown Castle, whether that was where she was born or not, I'm not too sure. His father was James Graham. I think he may have been born in Clones. I'm not too sure. When the Reverend John was going to school, he probably was taught Gaelic, as later on when he writes about the parish of Shrewd, he's able to translate the names of the parishes from the English to the Irish and from the Irish to the English. He worked for a short period later as a sub-sheriff of County Longford before entering Trinity College as a student in 1794. Ballymahon town, you can see in the third slide on the bottom right, would have been the local town for him. On the other side, you can see the bridge of Shrewd. That's named after the parish, and it's very close to the ancient graveyard and church in Shrewd. St. Catherine's Church, which you can see in the other slide, is close to the Inny River in Ballymahon. And some of John's relatives are buried in the graveyard in St. Catherine's. One of the stones in the graveyard goes to the memory of James Richard Graham, deceased 5th of March 1823, aged 2 years, and Elizabeth Grace Graham, deceased 9th of April 1823, aged 14 years. Those were children of his brother. The stone goes on to say, rescued by pitying heaven from the evil to come, they winged their early flight to the bosom of the Saviour, who invited the dear children to come on to him. On the tombstone is carved a coat of arms resembling that of the Grahams of Drina in Scotland. Fiona.
In 1794, he left County Longford to study for an undergraduate degree at Trinity College, having, in Graham's words, obtained the distinguished honour of first place, but living on a scanty allowance, where he remained in an honourable state of poverty from the years 1794 until 1798, when he obtained a degree. The huge Dublin College Library, which is the image on the slide, was completed in 1732 and reflects, along with the other classical college buildings built in the 18th century, the importance of learning. Students were worked hard and followed a general curriculum of classics, mathematics, a little science, and some philosophy. Graham's academic record reveals he was stronger in Greek and Latin than he was in the other subjects. In 1797, he is absent from his exams, possibly because he was focused elsewhere, having joined the college corps of yeoman infantry without pay and having equipped himself at his own expense and paying a weekly sum, which resulted in a debt which he had not been able to pay off many years later. In August 1798, having carried out a full proportion of the garrison duty of Dublin, John took his name off the college books and headed the 124 miles to County Mayo to be ordained as a clergyman in the Church of Ireland.
When John went to Ballina, the French were after landing, and instead of being ordained, he came back to County Longford. The French made their way across Ireland, and he ended up at Ballinammuck, County Longford. Now, while he was in Ballina, there was a Reverend James Little, who was the rector of the parish of Lacken. And James Little was also a Longford man. So whether he met James Little while he was there or not, I'm not too sure. But James Little left 2 diaries, an account of the French landing, and they're housed in Dublin, in the National Library in Dublin. When he got to Ballinammuck, according to his own account, John Graham seen 700 dead bodies on the battlefield of Ballinammuck. Now, this probably wasn't a very easy thing for him to see, because I'm sure he may have been a soldier, but I'm sure he wasn't a soldier in the sense that he was out doing the slaughter. He came back to Longford again. I'm just going through this piece, Fiona. I know you'll be taking the story up from Ballinammuck, but he came back to Longford in 1820, and he founded the Oliver Goldsmith Society. And this society is still going today. While he was in Longford in 1820, according to the Belfast newsletter, he was at the Goldsmith anniversary. He defended the fact that the author and poet was born in a palace, pointing to the fact that Dr. Samuel Johnson, who wrote Goldsmith's epitaph, would have no knowledge of either Forgany, Palace, or indeed County Longford, all of which he mentions in his tribute. He goes on to say, unless the poet himself had told him. In his address on the occasion, he went on to say, this evidence, gentlemen, I consider to be conclusive. For Dr. Johnson cannot be supposed to have known that such obscure places, Palace, Forgany, existed, except from the lips of the poet himself, who was on the most intimate terms of friendship with him. If we in Ballymahon have on this occasion dwelt with too much minuteness upon this disputed point, our best apology is that the contending for the honour of the birthplace of such an ornament to his country is a pardonable ambition, and it will be recollected too in favour of our claim, as well as an apology for a maintenance of it, that one of the wishes dearest to the poet's heart, when unable to return to the place of his nativity, was that his brother and his sister, Lissoy and Ballymahon, would all together make a migration to him into the country of Middlesex. From the photographs, the first one you can see, top left, is Ballinammuck. Today it's a kind of a museum to the battle. Forgany Church is the second photograph on the top, and this was built by the Bishop of Meath, who he mentions in his writing as well. The Bishop of Meath was Thomas Lewis O'Byrne, who was also a Longford man. And Thomas Lewis O'Byrne, along with his brother, had gone to France to be Roman Catholic priests. On the way, Thomas Lewis got sick and he came back for a while, but he went back to Paris and he finished his studies. But he met up with the Duke of Portland, it is said, and the Duke of Portland offered him a position, and later on he was made a priest of the Anglican Church, or the Church of England. And in Longford, during his period, when he was ill, he came back to Longford again. He was parish priest, or he was the rector of Temple Michael Parish, while his brother was the parish priest of the corresponding parish. Thomas Lewis O'Byrne went on. He built about 120 churches and rectories during his time. He's famous for his building. The photograph on the right, the window, is in memory of Oliver Goldsmith. His father was the rector of the church, you see there, Forgally Church. And the bottom photograph then is Newcastle Bridge, which is very close to Central Parks now. The Goldsmith legacy of John Graham was the Ballymahon Goldsmith Festival, as I said. And just a few of Oliver Goldsmith's sayings. One time, according to John Graham, he was at a party and Oliver Goldsmith suffered very badly from smallpox. And he was a very ugly child, according to all reports. There was a fiddler playing and Oliver got up and he was dancing. And the fiddler stopped playing and he said, Aesop. And Goldsmith was supposed to turn around and say, Heralds proclaim aloud, all saying, see Aesop dancing and his monkey playing. Another of his sayings was, I love everything that's old friends, old times, old manners, old books, and old wine. And last one is, people seldom improve when they have no other model but themselves to copy. Oh, Fiona.
In the words of Graham, he returned to Dublin disappointed and was ordained on the 20th of February 1799 in the college chapel. He headed to County Clare for 10 years to be curate, assisting the minster in 2 churches in a parish that covered 25 miles of coastline. The stipend of the curate was set at a maximum of £75 and was paid by the rector. By 1800, Graham was writing poetry, which would later be published. In the same year, he records that there was a great scarcity of provisions. It was at Kilrush that he met his wife, Elizabeth England Johnson, and they married in June 1802 with their first son, James, born in July 1803. Towards the end of 1806, Helly Dutton arrived looking for statistical information to publish, and John contributed. Reverend Graham would later write a chapter on the Union for Mason Shaw's parochial survey. In 1809, he left County Clare, having been appointed a curacy in County Londonderry by the Bishop of Derry, William Knox.
Oh dear.
Hello, there seems to be a bit of a problem with the volume at the minute. I'm not too sure who's supposed to be speaking.
It's myself.
Oh, Joe, right?
Aye.
Do you want to go ahead there, Joe?
Well, I'll try to get the video to play from my end. That's right.
Okay.
Oh, whenever the Reverend John Graham, curator assistant, wrote his portion for Shaw Masons, a statistical account of the local survey of Ireland for the diocese of the ancient town of Morrigu, one of my favourite general accounts historically was the reproduction of. Can they hear that? Of this little green coloured book, there are
A wee bit echoey, Joe, but I can hear it better.
anecdotes of the local community and their habitual activities at that time, as well as geographical descriptions and archaeological findings.
Very, very echoey, Joe. Very underwater.
Hold on. The infamous rector Worthy Sodden was in charge of the diocese. Locally and perhaps well known, he was known for his heavy-handed approach in 1798 with the local United Irishmen, and was actively and vigorously involved in their downfall and apprehension at every turn. Even allowing the military to use a large tree in the rectory grounds to be used in the hanging of United Irishmen, Walter Graham, known locally as Watty, and his companion Billy Cuddy. The rectory house at the time was approximately 100 feet from where the new rectory of the Reverend James Knox now stands. And that was the only house in the district to be tiled with wooden shingles, according to legend. It was relatively large and had an avenue leading up to it. As for the work carried out in Longford, where the mason diaries are the fabulous descriptions of the local lakes and rivers, starting from Carntopper and running through the Tamlaghtard until it reaches the Bann near Portmore. He also writes about bogs and quarries and different kinds of stone to be found. Interestingly, under its modern building sections, a wretched market house is the only public building here. Morrigu was a place where the sessions for the district should have been held, but Macrofelt has become the sessions town, which contributes in no small degree to improvement. We have no infirmary, hospital or jail, nor any place of confinement, except a pair of stocks at the market house, which is seldom unoccupied on fair or market days. He also gives description of the ancient church of St. Earth and its cathedral history, and to the wrath that are many, describing his Danish forts. Also in his writings, he brings attention that the poorer people or lower classes who are worse clad than in other places, and in the crowd there could be seen them wearing a whole clothes bought from the military from Belfast, and also the old attire of Scottish nobility that whenever the Reverend John Donovan surveys, he also draws attention to the different ways
into the mild thing, again for northern Scotland, where it could be cold enough to see some further falls of snow. But for many of us, temperatures around.
Hello.
Hello.
Who's got their TV on?
Yeah, no.
Right, are we having a problem with sound here?
Yes, having a problem with sound. I think it's
Right.
both video.
Whenever
Can
the
you hear
Reverend
that?
John Graham
Yes.
cures an assistant,
I think, Fiona, we're having problems with picture and sound.
The new campaign in the UK is urging people to avoid.
Right, I can see everything. Who can't? Is it the sound and picture from my end? Yeah.
whenever
Can you hear
the
that?
Reverend John
Yeah,
Graham
I can hear you speaking, Fiona, and we're at my end. We're getting the same picture shown over and over and over again.
Which picture are you seeing?
The old church.
The picture of the old
Okay.
St. Lyric's Church.
Okay, that's actually Joe's film. So if I press it, can you hear it playing?
Whenever the Reverend John Graham cures an
No.
assistant wrote his
No,
Yes.
Yes,
you can.
there's sound now. Yes.
Right. I can hear a TV playing.
United States. At least 4 people have died.
Can you just mute us all, Fiona?
Spain.
Yeah, I'm trying to mute you now. I think it was William Hisson.
Don't blame him. I'll
Yeah.
move on to a different picture. There we are. Let's see if what else can go wrong. Oh, okay, right. We're going to stay at this picture. I'm going to talk about this a bit. The rector was Reverend Clockworthy Sodden, who received £1,000 a year in tithes and rent, but who had a reputation for going into debt. Reverend Graham was still receiving the curate's stipend of £75. He now had 4 children, James, Richard, Elizabeth and William. And in the summer of 1812, when the Clark's corner meal stores saved many of the poor people from starving, their daughter Anna was born. In the same year, between May and November, John inoculated 380 children from smallpox. Whilst there, he wrote the 3 chapters for Shaw Mason's 3-volume Parochial Survey of Ireland. In 1813, 14 years after being ordained, John writes to Robert Peel, Chief Secretary, saying that he was unable to support his family on an inadequate income arising solely from the salary of a curacy and the interest of £400. This small income still more inadequate by having devoted his entire time and attention to literary pursuits of the most importance to the welfare of Ireland. He requested that Robert Peel recommend him to some ecclesiastical benefice which may enable him to educate and provide for his family and to become, by being relieved from the depressing cares incident to poverty, more extensively and effectively serviceable to the cause of religion and social order. In 1814, another son, John, adds to Reverend Graham's growing family. In the same year, Reverend Graham is put on the Lord Lieutenant's list of candidates for preferment. Okay, Andrew Kane.
Hello. Oh, okay, Fiona, thank you. Oh, right. That's not just as readable. Basically, what I'm going to talk about, if you just hold on 1 second, I'm going to try to bring up slide. Fiona, can you let me share my screen instead, and I'll just put the slide up from here.
I'm then coming out of the whole thing to go back in,
All
Andrew.
right, no,
could you just
don't
manage
bother.
with?
Don't bother. Okay. So the next stop in the Reverend Graham's career was the parish of Tamlaghtard, and specifically the parish of Tamlaghtard Lower. This Tamlaghtard was a large parish in South Derry, rural parish, and at the time of the plantation, it was served from Clare, Tamlaghtard overall one parish. and in the Presbyterian and Roman Catholic churches, they continued to be served together up till the Reverend Graham's time, along with the neighbouring parish of Desert Tokel. So although this large area had a population that was only 16% Church of Ireland, it had 4 parish units, 4 clergy within that area, whereas the Roman Catholics and Presbyterians, who made up 48 and 36% respectively of the population, had only 1 congregation each until the 1830s. Tamlaghtard Lower, which was also known as Innisrush, was the parish to which the Reverend Graham was appointed, and he had a total Church of Ireland population of about 670 people. The parishes, that group of parishes, had a total population at the time of around 15,000. The Reverend Graham was Innisrush's first incumbent who was not a member of the Torrens family. The Innisrush parish had been split from Upper Tamlaghtard Upper in 1775, at which time the son of the current rector, the Reverend Robert Torrens, was appointed as the perpetual curate of the lower parish. This was a very short, Reverend Graham had a short stay here, as he was appointed in 1815, and he moved on to Leffert in the autumn of 1817. If you look at the map, which is on the screen, it's quite hard to make out some of the different shades, but the green on the map shows the Mercer's Company estates based on Kilrea. The lilac colour in the bottom right represents the Vintners estate based on Balachi, and the pink areas, which kind of look the same as the lilac in this picture, are the lands belonging to the Church of Ireland in the parish. The townlands with names written on them are ones within the parish of Tamlaghtard, O'Crilly, and the bit just at the bottom right, we can see the dark red line surrounding 8 townlands. That represents the parish of Tamlaghtard Lower, or Innisrush, where the Reverend Graham served. So as you can see, the landlord of his parishioners was in general the Vintners Company, who had, they however had sold their estates in 1729 to William Connolly of Limavady. So the London Company were no longer involved in the administration of the area. There were lots of church lands in the area. In fact, the parish of Tamlaghtard contains the glebe land of the parishes of Kilrea, Tamlaghtard, Balachi, Termonini, and Desert Martin. And although Desert Tokel is closely associated with the parish of Tamlaghtard, the glebe land of that parish is in an entirely separate parish, completely Errigal, north of Desert Tokel. So there's a lot of church influence in the area. The Reverend Graham arrived in Innisrush at a very turbulent time. 1815 means the Battle of Waterloo to most people, and although he was in a far-flung part of the country, the principal players were very well known to the inhabitants. Lord Castlereagh, who was the Foreign Secretary at the time, was actually one of the 4 co-heirs. His wife was a niece of the Connolly, Thomas Connolly of Castletown, and had inherited a quarter share of the Vintners' estates. And he did, there's correspondence in Crony showing that he took a close interest in the administration of this area. The Mercer's estate was owned by Alexander Stewart, an uncle of Lord Castlereagh, and he had been the property owner there for over 40 years and would be the property owner for the next 20 as well. Tyne, the townland in which Innisrush Church stands, was the first cousin of George Canning, the future Prime Minister, and the Britain's ambassador to Portugal during the Peninsular Wars, and who followed Castlereagh as Foreign Secretary. So the local land was owned by people very involved politically, and very much those people would be familiar names to the people of Innisrush. The Kilrea and Mackeraw area had shown strong support for the 1798 rebels. A guillotine had been discovered by the previous incumbent of Innisrush, the Reverend John Torrens, in the townland of Lisnagrot at the time of the rebellion. And Dan McCusker, who led the Kilrea rebels, like the Reverend Graham, found himself in County Mayo in August 1798. He was not so lucky. He was one of the bodies that were left lying on the battlefield and didn't live to write about it. In addition to these turbulent times throughout Europe, there was a major local fight going on at the time. The rector of Tamlaghtard Upper, the Reverend James Jones, was a rather autocratic individual. He was the grandson of the Marquis of Waterford, the Beresford family, whose estates were initially in co-reign, but then through marriages they'd expanded. And he wanted, the church had been condemned by the authorities as unfit for use, and he wished to have it knocked down and moved from Tamlet village to Killygullab Glebe, where he himself lived. This was not particularly unreasonable, as it's a lot more central to the parish, given that part of it had been hived off. And also it was, the old church needed to be rebuilt anyway. However, as we saw, the small Church of Ireland population of only 16% in the area meant that voting on the vestry was very much dominated by the other denominations, and led by the Reverend John Smith, the Presbyterian minister in Kilrea, and whose responsibilities included Tamlet. They objected to the relocation of Tamlet Church so violently that 7 people, including the Reverend Smith, were later convicted of riot. The outcome of this dispute was that the new churches, both at Tamlet and at Innisrush, were rebuilt, but on their same sites, and the Reverend Jones moved on to Castlereagh. He was replaced by the Reverend Edward Knox, who later became Bishop of Limerick, and introduced a more diplomatic style of leadership in the Tamlet area. Although the Reverend Graham was now an incumbent and his own boss in the parish of Tamlaghtard Lower, he was not a tithe receiving full rector. He was what was known as a perpetual curate, who received a salary of just under £100 a year and had a small glebe of about 25 acres, which was a reasonable farm for the time. Many farmers of 25 acres would have considered themselves to be reasonably well off. So his position was better than that of a curate working under a rector, but not considerably from the financial point of view. He had a glebe house in Glenone townland, close to the bridge to Port Glenone, and it's described in the Ordnance Survey memoirs as a 2-story slated oblong building. The glebe house stands on an eminence and commands a delightful prospect of Port Glenone and its well-improved neighbourhood for some miles. The house was built about 1780 by the Reverend Robert Torrens, who was the rector of the undivided parish of Tamlaghtard prior to 1775. So by the autumn of 1817, the financial issues which Reverend Graham suffered throughout his career led to him seeking a different post, and he left the parish of Tamlaghtard Lower to move to Leffert in County Donegal. Thank you, Fiona.
Thank you, Andrew. Okay, so as Andrew mentioned, Reverend Graham went off to Clonley in the Diocese of Derry. And now we are going to try and listen to a film.
In 1817, when John Graham first came to Leffert, it was the town that you'd very much recognise today. Leffert is a Georgian town and has remained virtually untouched by the Industrial Revolution and indeed much of the 20th century. As a town, it first developed in the 16th century around a castle, and in 1611, Leffert came into the possession of Richard Hansard during the plantation of Ulster. And one of the conditions of the operation was the operation of a ferry over the river to Tyrone, which continued until the first bridge was built in 1730. So the bridge would have been there between Strabane and Leffert when John Graham came here. And I struggle to say the name of the church. St. Lugudatius, is it, church, was first built in 1621 as a memorial to the Hansard family, and he also left instructions in his will for a school and schoolhouse to be built as well. And in the centre of the town, the diamond, as is called the square in most Irish towns, is Leffert Courthouse, and it was built in 1746. And one of a number of buildings around the diamond, all of which would have been seen by the Reverend Graham. There was a new jail had been built there in 1793. And outside this, public hangings would have taken place, and indeed with a spectacle of people gathered round it. Around the diamond as well was also located, in addition to the courthouse and the jail, was to one side the lunatic asylum and the school itself, the school where the Reverend Graham also was working as well. So all this was around the diamond in the centre of Leffert, and indeed the diamond is still recognisable today. And probably the most prominent thing just to the north of the diamond is the church itself, which, as I say, was built in 1611 and still looks pretty much as it would. So back in the diamond from St. Lugudatius, beside the county buildings, is where the Hansard School was. That's really facing the courthouse, and that would have been there in the diamond really up until the 1960s, when it was demolished to provide more office space for the county council buildings there in the diamond in Leffert.
The Reverend Graham was to actually serve in Leffert from 1817 to 1824. On the 30th of September 1817, an advert appeared in the Strabane Morning Post heralding his arrival. It said, "The Reverend John Graham, AM, begs leave to inform his friends and public that the Earl of Erin, having been pleased to consider him a fit and proper person to succeed to the Classical School of Leffert, he has provided a comfortable room for the reception of pupils until the schoolroom on the premises can be put into a state of habitable repair, and the school will be opened on the 5th of October. An assistant duly qualified to teach English in its various departments has been engaged in the school. Terms, a guinea entrance and a guinea a quarter, with the usual additional charges for those who are to be taught writing and arithmetic." This might make it sound like the Reverend was coming to undertake a commercial enterprise. However, one of Reverend Graham's pupils became the later Professor James McCullough of Dublin University, and Dr. William Graham recalls that his father taught James and would never accept a farthing for any instruction he afforded him. In October 1817, John Graham became the curate of Clonley at St. Lugudatius, having taken over the position left by Reverend John Russell Knox. Attached to the curacy was that of Inspector of Leffert Jail. His daughter Mary was born on the 17th of October, and on the 9th of November 1817, £100 is received from Lord Kenyon, to the great relief of his family, when many about him were in low state of affliction from famine and typhus fever. In March 1818, the Earl Talbot, the Lord Lieutenant, offered him the vicarage of Ballyshannon in County Kildare with a value of £200, but that was nearly £100 less than his income in Leffert, so he did not accept. It was offered on the understanding that Reverend Graham's stipend was the common curacy of £75 per annum. However, he was now receiving £250 in income as curate, inspector and chaplain of a jail and lunatic asylum, and superintendent of an endowed school. But the duties were particularly oppressive to him, as he had asthma, which had affected him for many years. In June 1819, Thomas Smith, a prisoner in Leffert jail, complained about the Reverend Graham's treatment of him, saying he was starving. In July 1819, Reverend Graham responded to the Chief Secretary's office, explaining that the Grand Jury of the County of Donegal had ordered him not to give the jail allowance to those who cannot procure an affidavit made by two persons before a magistrate that they were able to subsist without it, and that Thomas Smith had a pension of £1 a day, so could not get the allowance he demanded without further orders. In September 1819, Reverend Graham sent a letter to Charles Grant, who had replaced Robert Peel as the Chief Secretary, stating, "I have spent the last 10 years in the province of Ulster, not only attending to my private clerical duties, being the humble advocate of the Church and Crown in the Anti-Jacobean Review and other publications, a line of conduct which has procured me the approbation of many wise and distinguished personages, among them His late Excellency Earl Whitworth and Lord Kenyon, from one of whom I had the honour of receiving a present of 50 and the other of £100 to preserve my family and myself from poverty, which we felt and feel savagely." In 1819, his Annals of Ireland, Ecclesiastical, Civil and Military, was published with the aid of Lord Kenyon. And then on the 5th of January 1820, his son Thomas was born. And it is clear from the Reverend's correspondence that the family's needs seemed always to exceed their income. In February, he wrote to Charles Grant, enclosing a letter from Lord Kenyon, whose acquaintance with me arose out of my advocacy of the cause of the established church in the Anti-Jacobean Review and other publications. He tells him, "I will not trouble you with any further representation of my situation, from the inadequacy of my income to maintain a family consisting of a wife and 8 children, the eldest just ready to enter college without my being able to meet the expense of it." He requests favourable representation to His Excellency, the Lord Lieutenant. In November of that year, Reverend Graham's eldest son, James, entered Trinity College, Dublin. In June 1821, the North West of Ireland Society held a competition offering a piece of plate worth £20 as first prize, £15 as second prize, and £10 as third prize. This was offered for the best statistical report of any barony, half-barony or other district. Reverend Graham entered, writing about Clonlee, and came third. He was then enrolled as an honorary member. Reverend Graham now notes in his communication with the Chief Secretary's office that he had contributed to the Anti-Jacobean Review, the Gentleman's Magazine, the Glasgow Protestant, the Dublin Correspondent, and the Belfast Newsletter, together with the statistical surveys of William Shaw Mason. In January 1822, Robert Peel sent a note to Henry Goulburn, the then Chief Secretary, enclosing a letter from the Reverend Graham, stating that I perfectly recollect that he was a candidate for preferment at the time he mentions. The attached letter from Reverend Graham referred to Robert Peel putting him on the Lord Lieutenant's list for preferment 7 years before. He stated, I founded my humble claims upon my advocacy of the Protestant religion, and Mr. Grant told him he would recommend him to Earl Talbot. Afterwards, he was offered a very small benefice in a turbulent part of Kildare for £200. But having a jail inspectorship attached to my curacy here, I would have ruined my family had I accepted. And he went to a very inconvenient expense in travelling up to Dublin to beg the Lord Lieutenant for permission to declare it, which he obtained. His Excellency saying that my doing so would be no bar to my being taken off at another time. I had long and faithfully serviced the Crown and Church. Graham explained that he couldn't afford the journey, but then remembered that he had received £20 from Sir Walter Scott for an ancient manuscript. He continues with his appeal as he fears that the now Earl Talbot is retiring. All reasonable hope of my getting any competence is at an end unless I get a recommendation to Mr. Goulburn. He tells him, I have my eldest son at college. I feel most acutely the inadequacy of my little income to maintain him in Dublin and the rest at home. He ends by mentioning the numerous surveys he has been involved in. Money seems now to be a constant source of worry for Reverend Graham, as in the month of May he sent an introductory letter to Henry Goulburn attaching a statement of the case of the Reverend John Graham. He writes again on the 24th to thank Henry for sending his petition to the Lord Lieutenant, adding, I am weighed down by the heavy expenses of a large family and sunk unavoidably in debt to strangers. He adds that he has struggled to maintain his son in college for the last 2 years, and he hopes that he can maintain him until the scholarship examination the following year. On the same day, he wrote to the Marquess of Wellesley, the Lord Lieutenant of Ireland, stating that he had been permitted to indulge the hope of a competent preferment, and in the meantime he had contributed to the maintenance of religion and social order through many publications, and that being in a very low state of poverty owing to his large family, and peddling all the vexations incident to this unhappy state, he knows. He asks for humane consideration of his case. In July, Dr. Reid, a London-based County Tyrone-born surgeon, visited Leffert. He wrote thus of his visit. After breakfast, I waited on the Reverend Mr. Graham, the local inspector of the prison, who accompanied me to the lunatic asylum, a place I shall always look on with horror. The wretched inmates flocked around Mr. Graham, to whom most of them had some little request to prefer. The manner in which he complied with some, evaded others, and conciliated all, at once convinced me that he was deeply versed in the knowledge of the heart. The surgeon continues in a very positive vein, stating that since Mr. Graham has had charge of this institution, a great number of persons have been restored to the blessings of sanity. His system is comprised of 2 words, kindness and
Limavady
patience.
Area Ancestry have a live
Jail
talk
are
about some
besides
minister from
33 lunatics in the
Tamlaghtard.
asylum, there are 8 in the jail.
But the
There
interesting
are
thing
also
was
92 other prisoners, 20 of whom are debtors. Dr. Reid is invited to John's house, where he spends 4 hours discussing statistical and literary subjects and reading Reverend Graham's large collection of manuscript compositions in prose and verse. Of them, he said, he sometimes whiled away a tedious hour. He is impressed with the Reverend Graham. In November 1822, Reverend Graham wrote to the editor of the Warder, protesting that Priest Hayes can advertise without molestation, but he has received a letter threatening his life if he continues his publication in defence of the Protestant religion. On the 2nd of January 1823, Sir Harcourt's Vision, a poem, was published, Later in the same year, Derryana, a compilation dealing with the siege of Derry and the defence of Enniskillen in 1688 to 89, was completed, along with historical poetry and bibliographical notes. Finally, he came to the attention of the Bishop of Derry and was to receive his long-awaited promotion.
In 1817,
After 25 years as a curate, Reverend Graham was promoted by the Bishop of Derry to the rectorship of Tamlaghtard in Magilligan, replacing Mr. Pomeroy on the 27th of April, 1824. His congregation numbered around 500 out of a population of 3,600 inhabitants. He not only had a glebe, but also a rectory. In 1826, an allotment for tithe composition agreed the Reverend Graham should receive £425 in tithes, along with the rental of the glebe lands of a little over £36, which, after the deduction of the 15% payable to the landlord for tithe collection, left an income of £398. Reverend Graham's third son, Richard, entered Trinity College, Dublin, aged 17, on the 18th of October 1824, with a scholarship. But less than a year after his promotion, his eldest daughter, Elizabeth, died at the age of 16. She was buried on the 13th of April, 1825, at Tamlaghtard Church. Robert Young, an aspiring young poet, was introduced to Reverend Graham in 1825, becoming a frequent visitor and remaining for 6 months, where he wrote the song for the anniversary of the shutting of the gates of Derry. He says of Graham, "He also gave me a very paternal advice, reminding me of the uncertainty of life and the danger of being discontented with the station in which we are placed, no matter how oppressive it might appear." Robert ignored Graham's advice to give up poetry and published several books which always included Reverend Graham's poems. In February 1826, Reverend Graham appeared in court, having been charged with the assault of 2 boys for Plain Patrick's Day. Armed with a holster gun and with his young son, who had a bayonet, and a male servant who was armed with a blunderbuss, he had snatched the fife from Bernard Connor and struck him on the head with the pistol before bringing down Thomas Mullen to his knees. Reverend Graham's defence was that he and his family had endured loud music and riotous behaviour around their house regularly. He was told by the magistrate that he should have applied to the upper courts to deal with the matter, but he declined, citing poverty. His servant, Mary Ann Snell, told the court that the noise had made a great impression on Mrs. Graham and the 3 or small 4 children, and even she was afraid. Reverend Graham was found guilty and given the option of paying £15 or being imprisoned. He went to prison for 4 months, and whilst in there, a mob of several hundred had collected under the sham pretext of a whisky fair on the glebe lands, and Reverend Graham was obliged to apply to a police officer to protect his family in his absence. The police were attacked. 3 people were imprisoned, but only 1 received a longer sentence than Reverend Graham. On the 24th of May, 1827, Reverend Graham's eldest son, James, was ordained by the Bishop of Derry at Derry Cathedral for the curacy of Magilligan. In 1829, Derryana is reprinted in 2 volumes. By early 1830, Reverend Graham had been given the title of a mad parson. There is unfortunately not enough time to describe the events tonight. Between the years 1831 and 1835, Reverend Graham once again returns to statistical surveys, assisting the Ordnance Survey memoir writers for Magilligan. It is noted that the writer James Boyle draws upon Reverend Graham's work, as Graham supplied, in a most distinctive style, detailed information on natural history and local features. On the 6th of March, 1844, Reverend Graham dies. He was aged 69 years. His funeral was attended by parishioners of all denominations, and the very solemn and affecting sermon was preached after the church service by the Reverend William Hughes, rector of Annaloo. After his death, a fund was started to support his widow and children who had been left in poverty. He'd been paying into the clergyman's widow's fund and his widow was therefore entitled to an annuity of £35 a year and rent-free accommodation in Derry. The fund was for the benefit of his widow, 3 daughters, and youngest son. He had provided a profession to his 4 sons, but only one, the Reverend James, could be said to be established, and upon him, with a small income and a family of his own, the support of his mother and sisters at present principally lies. If Mrs. Graham and Reverend James died, the writer warns, it would be a case of very melancholy destitution. Unfortunately, Mrs. Graham died the following year, as did her son, Reverend James. Of the remaining children, Reverend Richard survived an assassination attempt, had debts, and was sent to be a chaplain in Trinidad. Dr. William, who survived the Hannah Brig disaster, had spent his life drinking, became known as the Hermit of Derry, and died at Derry Asylum. Thomas and Anne died at their brother's house in Newry. Mary died in Dublin. John moved to London and was the last surviving child of Reverend John and Elizabeth Graham. Tonight, we have a descendant of John Graham's with us. Kate Graham is his great, 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 great granddaughter.
Hello, yes, I'm Kate Graham, and on this slide you're going to see the line from Reverend John Graham down to me through the years, and I've been doing some research for a number of years on him and on the family as well. And as Fiona said at the beginning of this talk, that one of the things that I wish we had was a picture of him. The only pictures I've put here of my descendants. So his granddaughter, C.E. Humphrey, there, and then her son Cecil Walter and his son Cecil Wynne. They all had those ears, I think. And then my own father, Kenneth Walter, and then there's me. And there's a belief that there is a portrait of the Reverend John Graham that we have yet to locate. And in 1957, C.E. Humphrey's daughter donated some personal effects, and they were donated by a man to the Londonderry Corporation. And in the Londonderry Sentinel, it said that there was a portrait in oils of the Reverend John Graham. And so that's the portrait that we've all been looking for. But I tracked down an interview that happened, it was in the Sketch in 1894, and C.E. Humphrey, his granddaughter, says in that interview that a friend of hers gave her a portrait of John Graham, but this was John Graham of Claverhouse, also known as the Bonnie Dundee. And she said that her friend gave it to her because she so resembled him. And I think this is possibly the portrait, because I went to the will of her daughter Pearl, and it said that the man John Hopkins was named in the will as receiving her effects, and then he donated them to the Londonderry Corporation. So I'm not certain whether there actually is a portrait of the Reverend John that exists. I think it's the wrong John Graham. It might be John Graham of Claverhouse. And there's a next slide here coming that says, I've learned just a few things about the family. Fiona, if you want to turn it to that slide, that would be good. And it just, most of them were writers. Most of them were newspaper writers of columns. His granddaughter regained a lot of fame doing etiquette and cookery books. She wrote a song as well. He wrote songs, and she wrote a song called the Union Jack, which was reported in the paper as being quite popular. Her daughter was a writer of books and newspaper columns and cookery books as well. And she also was a reporter with her husband during World War I in France, and they wrote books together. And on the other line, some of my relatives also were interested in the arts, and Cecil Walter was apparently a very good diarist as well and had written quite a nice diary. In 2018, I made a trip over and I was able to visit the church, and in 2020, I commissioned Mark Moore, who is a local artist who hails from the Limavady area, and he painted me a picture of the church. And I think Fiona is going to show that now. And I'm very happy to have that in my house. And there it is there. And so Mark painted that for me and sent it over. I'm living in Canada. And then I also was able to meet in 2018 Aaron Callan, and he gave me a very lovely tour of the Orange Heritage Center and showed me around and was very hospitable to me. And I think we're going to hear now from Aaron, who's going to tell us about the Reverend John Graham's history with the Orange Order.
Hello, my name's Aaron Callum. I'm Secretary of the Roe Valley Historical Society. I've been asked by Fiona to give a short talk on Reverend John Graham and his involvement in the Orange Order and the Orange Movement. Before I get into what Reverend John Graham did and his influence and importance in the Orange Movement, I wanted to give a brief understanding of the Orange structures, because without that understanding of the structures, you can't understand then the influence and the role that Reverend John Graham himself played. So the Orange Movement very much started as a grassroots movement. After the Battle of Diamond in 1795, the Orange Order was founded. It then quickly gained popularity throughout Ireland. At one point, it was estimated it had over 200,000 members. It grew very rapidly because of first its involvement with local farmers in the Armagh area, and then the word spread out, but also because of the yeomanry movement at the time. So many of the members of the Orange institution were also involved in the yeomanry movement, and you've seen lodges then sprout up all over the place because of that influence and the passing of the word, essentially. The structures of the Orange Order is very much centred around private lodges, beginning with in a local area. So if I take Limavady as an example, Limavady currently has 15 private lodges, which cover a geographical spread from Dungiven to Annaloo and out to McGilligan. Above that then is a district, which covers that whole geographic area of Limavady. Then above Limavady district, you have the county. So Limavady belongs in County Londonderry Grand Lodge, and then above that then is the Grand Lodge of Ireland. And at the various levels, you all have offices within those various levels. So a private lodge will have a worshipful master, a deputy master, a chaplain, a treasurer, and a secretary, and that's replicated the whole way through up to you get to Grand Lodge, where you have a Grand Master and a deputy Grand Master and Grand Chaplains. So now that we've touched on the structures and how the Orange Order is structured and how it was formed, I want to talk about Reverend John Graham himself. So Reverend John Graham, as you know, was the rector of Tamlaghtard in McGilligan. He has been described as the best of the Orange poets. He also had the nickname Crazy Graham, and he's the only county master to have lived in Limavady. He was county master of County Londonderry from 1825 to at least 1842. He was a member of a lodge in Armagh, LL 184. It's believed that he got involved at Trinity College, Dublin. But during his career and his life involved in Orangism, he was someone who was noted as a kind of contrarian figure. He rubbed up against the leadership of Grand Lodge on numerous occasions. He was someone who was pivotal in Orangism at a very difficult time. There was two times during Graham's involvement in Orangism that the Orange Movement was dissolved or disbanded. From 1825 to 1828, then later from 1836 to 1845, the Orange Movement had been suspended. So therefore, it was a very difficult and challenging time. However, Reverend John Graham was someone who was very much fundamentally believed in Protestantism and in the Orange Movement itself, and he wasn't never afraid to stand up for his brethren, and that's where the strain of Grand Lodge come into, because Grand Lodge was very much dominated by and operated by the very high elite within society at that time. But he rose nonetheless. He was county master, as I said, of County Londonderry, but he also was a Grand Lodge chaplain, which was quite a high senior position within the order even to this day. And he was someone who wasn't afraid to state his views. He often had disagreements with a number of people within the Orange Movement itself, as well as what he perceived as enemies of the Orange Movement. And he was seen as someone who was willing to stand up and say things that sometimes got him into trouble. Though he was well regarded, within the Orange circles itself, especially along the grassroots, he was very popular because of his writings. His songs, his poems were a standard fare at many Orange dinners throughout Ireland, which celebrated the glorious memory and the siege of Londonderry. He also became a major historian of the siege of Londonderry, and it was efforts that he put into that much of what we know about the siege today has been preserved. His poetry was very popular at the time. As I say, he was described as one of the best Orange poets, but his uncompromising view sometimes embarrassed quite a few people within Grand Lodge who were, at that time, and as I said, it was a difficult time for Orangism, were aware of the government tolerance or lack of tolerance for the Orange movement at that time. And that's why during that period, the Orange institution was dissolved for two periods. But Reverend John Graham during the 1820s was a pivotal figure in making sure Orangism in the west of Ulster survived and actually was continued on. And if it hadn't been for his efforts, the Orange institution today would be a very different, smaller, probably body than it is, and the extent that it was out in the west of Ulster would be much less than it is today. And it's really due to the efforts of Reverend John Graham that the Orange movement was kept alive in that very rural western part of Ulster at a very challenging and difficult time. He was a well-known figure, but sadly, whenever he died, there had been little recognition of that. But a number of years later, his tombstone, which is at, and a very impressive tombstone, at his former church, where he was rector at Tamlaghtard, was paid for after appeal of Orangemen and Protestants of Ireland not to allow his memory to be forgotten. So I wanted to end on one of his poems that he wrote. This was called Orangemen's Sentiments, and it actually would have been sung or done to the tune of Old Lang Syne, but I am not going to do that now. I'm just going to read out what his poem, what he wrote. I'm just reading out a couple of verses of it, and I think it's a nice way to end with the words of Reverend John Graham himself. Come, brethren, fill your glasses high. In concord let us join, and drink the glorious memory of him who crossed the boyne. William, thy name is ever dear, thy praises we still revere. Our father and our king and liberty, our constitutions and our laws, our breasted religion too, all united in this great clause. Our standard is true brew. Then, brethren, fill your glasses high, in concord let us join, and drink the glorious memory of him who crossed the boyne. For one great cause we will die, bound to defend our country's right. Our king, our liberty, our constitution, our laws, our breasted religion too, all united in this great cause. Our standard is true brew. That is just a short part of one of his poems, Orangemen's Sentiment. If anybody wants to learn and hear more about the Orange movement, there's a couple of publications I can recommend that cover around the period of Reverend John Graham and touch on John Graham himself. One is by David Brewster, who is a local historian and Orangeman. It's called The Sash Our Fathers Wore. Another one is From Dolly's Brae to Westminster by Dr. Jonathan Madison, who is the creator at the Orange Museum in Belfast. Hopefully you found that short talk on Reverend John Graham's involvement in the Orange movement, how he ascended and what he did, interesting. And if you want to hear more, do pick up those couple of publications.
Thank you very much.
Okay, Fiona, is that it for today?
That is it.
Okay, it just leaves me to say thank you very much to Fiona, all her hard work in putting that all together. And cheers very much to everybody who got involved in the talk. It was very interesting. And of course, a big thank you to the Reverend Grace Jones, who came on at the start there, and hope it gives them a bit of something to look forward to in the future. Maybe Aaron can do a talk for him in the Tamlaghtard.
Absolutely.
That's really it for tonight. Reece, do you want to say something there?
No, I want to thank you again for the chance to participate, Stephen. Listen, there may have been a few technical problems, but look, that's the nature of these things. I've enjoyed it immensely. I've learned a lot about someone who was a colleague in the profession I've undertaken. Obviously, someone who has left a mark both locally and more nationally. And I think it's someone whose legacy certainly I wouldn't mind as his predecessor, or as someone who has come following his footsteps in Tamlaghtard, exploring a little bit more. Everyone who contributed obviously worked hard. Fiona, thank you very much. Joe, who's from Muckra, who I know, Joe, thank you as well. All of you, really and truly well done. Please don't be upput by the difficulties. These things happen. I look forward to joining again. I don't know what Steve will have up his sleeve or Fiona up her sleeve the next time, but please do all join again and support them in their endeavours. I'm going to just finish by saying thank you. God bless you all.
Thank you very much, Reverend Jones. Thank you all from Trasnatira and Limavady Area Ancestry. Our next talk is on Wednesday night when we're joined by Linda Irvine, and she's going to give us a talk on the Irish language. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
I'll just stop recording.